Today on Locked On Red Wings, we bring in hockey analytics guru Prashanth Iyer as we do a prospect profile on projected top 10 pick Frank Nazar.
You're Locked On Red Wings, your daily podcast on the Detroit Red Wings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Red Wings podcast. We are your hosts, Brian Fisher and Scotty Bentley. I'm a producer over at 97.1 The Ticket. Scotty is also host over at Locked On Tigers, as well as a freelance journalist for the Detroit News. And today we are happy to bring on Prashanth Iyer. If you're on hockey Twitter, you definitely know who he is. His former work was with Hockey Graphs, The Athletic Detroit, and Winging It in Motown. And now he's just kind of an analytic savant. I mean, you're a guy that I constantly am DMing, as I try to learn analytics. I'm like, hey, Prashanth, what does this mean? So, first of all, Prashanth, welcome. Two, how are you?
Thanks you guys for having me. Thanks for extending the invite. And I'm doing great. It's a lovely 107-degree day here in North Carolina. So you will have to see some chest hair with this tank top because
it's glorious, to be honest.
It's excruciating,
incredible,
painful out here. So
I might have to censor it though for the children at home.
Yeah, I think that might be best.
So we're having you on today because you were continuing our prospect profiles for the upcoming NHL draft. It's been about 2 weeks since we've done one. It's just been tough with Scotty and I's schedules to get somebody to come on, and we're happy to have you on. And you said, and we've been DMing back and forth, and you said somebody you were kind of high on for the Red Wings at 8 if he was available was Frank Nazar. Frank Nazar, of course, is 18 years old, 5'10", 181 pounds. He's projected to go as high as 4th overall if you're listening to elite prospects, but could be anywhere in that 2 to 10 range. And he's played the last few years with the United States National U18 program, and as well as is a commit to the University of Michigan. Prashanth, what is it you like about Frank Nazar, and why do you think that the Red Wings should chase after this center/winger in that 8 range?
Yeah, I mean, Nazar is a guy, I think the first time you go to watch him, what you'll be struck by is he's an incredible skater and he's got excellent hands, and he plays the premium position of center that the Red Wings sorely need. And so, you set aside the physical attributes, the height, because, as soon as you introduce him as 5'10", everyone's going to, take a big pause and say, wait, I don't want a 5'10" center. Well, Steve Yzerman was a 5'10", 5'11", and that worked out all right. But, with Nazar in particular, I think he's electrifying. Arguably, if you're looking at the guys that have the most game-breaking talent in the draft, he's in the top 5 guys up there. Brad Lambert, if he pulls it together, Slavkovsky, Shane Wright, and probably Frank Nazar are the guys that have that game-breaking talent, the ability to sort of take over a game and control it with their offensive acumen, their decision-making. When you dive into his game a little bit more, the things that you really appreciate are nobody attacks the middle of the ice like Frank Nazar. In an article I put up for Wing Wheel podcast, and that was kind of pulled together by Cam Robinson of Elite Prospects. It's unbelievable when you look at Nazar's shot chart, where exactly he shoots the puck from. We're talking about a guy who shoots, almost 75% of his shots from the home plate area of the ice. He is relentless in attacking there. He's always looking to get to the middle. It just, to me, is the exact kind of guy the Red Wings are looking for.
Yeah, and so that is definitely a premium position too, because of the fact that they need a top 6 center, but also a little bit of wing depth could help too. So if he doesn't necessarily pan out at center, you could transition him to a wing, and they definitely need that as well. But what necessarily puts him over the top of his competition at that position? Because there is a handful of very good top 6 prospects in that top 10 pool. What do you see out of Nazar that really makes you go, this is the guy they should take over, let's say, a Slavkovsky?
Yeah, well, so Slavkovsky very likely is gone in the first 3 picks. And so if I'm thinking about the guys who are likely available around 8, you're probably looking at Marco Kasper out of the SHL, a center for Rogla. He's had a tremendous year. you're looking at Nazar's teammate, Cutter Gauthier, who's also had a tremendous year, although he's kind of on the rise, a little bit bigger, 6'2", 6'3", projected to play center in the NCAA next year, which may entice a lot of folks there. Logan Cooley's the other center from the NTDP. He's likely gone in the top 3 picks. And then after those guys at center, you're probably looking at Connor Geeky out of the WHL, who again has the prototypical size, but doesn't, the skating's the big knock on him. And so when I'm kind of looking at Nazar as the center out of all those remaining centers, likely Gauthier, Geeky, and then wingers maybe being Lekaramaki, also having Casper there as another center, Nazar has the most game-breaking talent. Nazar has the most high-end skill. And if I'm watching the Red Wings, and I have watched a lot of Red Wings,
as we all have,
the number one thing that this team is missing is the guy that can just go out and get his, the guy that can go out and make the play, the guy that can go out and create something from nothing, the guy that can create space for his teammates. The Wings simply have not had much of that. Dylan Larkin can do that at times. Andreas Athanasiou could do that at times. Anthony Mantha could do that at times. Jacob Vrana can do that at times. But they haven't had a guy that can just consistently, night in and night out, drive that kind of game-breaking ability since Pavel Datsyuk. And I'm not going to go out there and say Frank Nazar is Pavel Datsyuk. That would be ludicrous to say. But he has excellent hands. He's a great skater. And he is an excellent competitor and a guy that's willing to work hard. I would encourage everybody to go and check out his interview with Cam Robinson back in April, where he says, if you looked at me last year, I didn't try in the defensive zone. I didn't care whatsoever. But you see guys like Braden Point and Patrice Bergeron, the 2 guys he wants to model his game after, and he realizes the amount that he's got to work, and his game has just taken off this year. And so to me, those are all the pieces of a player that I want to believe in, and it's making me willing to overlook the fact that he's 5'10", 180 pounds.
Well, the thing too about 5'10", 180 pounds is he's 18 years old. He's not done growing. He could still get taller. Yet the classic case is Pavel Datsyuk, who was undersized when he was drafted and then continued to grow. So, I'm not necessarily turned off at 5'10". I see that as like a floor. Like at his smallest, will be 5'10".
Yeah, and in fact, when they measured him at the combine, he was 5'10" and a half. So already he's a half inch up on what they had him at, prior to the season. And so again, 5'10" and a half, 5'11". To me, that you're splitting hairs here, and he really is a guy where I just can't ignore that from that level of skill. Now, you have to play the devil's advocate here. You have to say, okay, at his size, as the guys get bigger, as the guys get taller, as the guys get faster, is Nazar going to be able to consistently attack the middle of the ice the same way he has at the NTDP level? I don't know. You don't know that. But to me, he's the kind of guy that has the skill, the hands, the skating to be able to do it if anybody could. You're almost hoping that he can be a Matt Barzal, Braden Point type of player with his ability to kind of turn things up.
I think when you talk about where he's scoring from, in that front of the ice area and how, size is important with everything. I mean, players that are currently on the Red Wings that are scoring from there, that kind of rings of Bertuzzi, but obviously the way that he's getting to in front of the net is different, right? So I guess just long-term play, do you think that center is legitimate? Do you think that he's a center as it goes forward?
Yeah, it's really tough to say for sure. My heart wants to believe that he'll be able to stick at center, and I think if he can demonstrate the 200-foot game that teams need to see from him, and what he really calls his weakness, if he can demonstrate the ability to come all the way back 200 feet, goal line to goal line, defend, and turn the puck up, I think he can stick at center. I have no concerns about his ability to skate. I have no concerns about his ability to attack in the offensive zone. It'll really be, does he have the defensive awareness and transition ability to go 200 feet, goal line to goal line, as is the responsibility of the majority of centers in most defensive systems in the NHL. One of the things that he does so well that I think will allow him to stick at center is probably there's nobody better in this draft to taking the puck off the boards to the middle of the ice. And so he's a guy that, again, can get that puck out of tough areas and get it into the dangerous areas. And for that reason, I like his ability to battle at the next level and potentially hold his weight at the center position. But again, it's not the end of the world if he ends up transitioning to wing, because a lot of those skills are translatable to what you need a winger to be able to do, just staving off some of those defensive responsibilities and allowing them to attack a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what might help him get a little bit stronger and get a little bit bigger is if he were to go to built.com.
Get a Built Bar.
Go to Built Bar. You know how our friends at Built are always coming out with new amazing flavors? Well, this time Built has truly outdone themselves with their new mud pie flavor. And for the first time ever, Built is introducing the new mud pie flavor in both mud pie bar and mud pie puff. That is a mouthful. Not sure what mud pie tastes like? Well, if you're a chocolate fan, you better sit down for this one. The new mud pie bar is rich whipped cream and chocolate mousse, smothered in 100% real chocolate and topped with cookies and cream crumble. You've got mud pies as soon as possible. You've got to try them as soon as possible, and you need to hurry because the mud pie bar and mud pie puff are only available for a limited time. Visit built.com to taste the deliciousness for yourself. Mud pie bars and puffs are available right now at built.com, but they are going fast because they are so delicious and they're covered in 100% real chocolate, just like every other Built bar. Chocolate mousse, whipped cream, cookies and cream crumble. Stop drooling. Get to built.com. Order your box of mud pies and puffs now. You won't regret it. Go to built.com, use promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. Segment 2, Locked On Red Wings podcast. Scotty and I are joined by Prashanth Iyer as he helps us do a prospect profile on Frank Nazar. And we heard a lot, Prashanth, about his strengths from you in the first segment, and even about his core weakness being what he's working on in his defensive play. So that leads me to my question of, we know his ceiling is as high as a top 6 center, but what do you see his floor being at the NHL level, if it's even at the NHL level?
I think he's an NHLer, no doubt. I think if you're looking at a floor, a worst case scenario would probably be a third line winger, a guy who's not able to attack the middle of the ice like he was able to at the lower levels, a guy that still struggles with in zone awareness in the defensive end, but ultimately a guy that can put some points up on the board for you. An example that I'm thinking of is maybe akin to what Andreas Athanasiou was able to provide the Red Wings, not necessarily 30-goal version of Andreas Athanasiou, but something along those lines where he's potentially a 15-goal, 35, 40-point player that can give you some scoring punch from the bottom lines, but isn't strong enough defensively to play higher in the lineup or down the middle. And I think that's probably your worst case scenario with Nazar, if he's not able to put together everything that he wants to.
Is not putting everything together, is that heavily reliant on the defense, do you think? Like, if we were to break his game in half into offense and defense and then talk about like floors and ceilings of both of those, do you think that the offensive floor, like offensively he is going to be an NHL player, and anything that, depending on how he hits his ceiling overall, will be heavily determined, I guess is what I'm trying to say, by the defense then?
I think it's a little bit mix of both, and that's a great question. The on the offensive side, one of the common critiques you'll see with Nazar is sometimes he does too much with the puck, or sometimes it seems like, man, why didn't you see that play? Why did you elect not to involve your teammate there? And you tried to do too much one-on-one and ultimately ended up turning the puck over. And that's the limitation on his offensive game, is sometimes he does try to do a little too much by himself. And sometimes he's going to make turnovers or plays where you're just scratching your head. You're like, you should have seen that. You should have made that read. You should have been making that pass to your teammate there. I think if you go and you dig into Corey Proman's scouting report on him, he'll often say that that's one of the knocks on Nazar, is not involving his teammates enough. And so I think that'll be key as he moves up and starts playing with more and more skilled players, particularly if he ends up sticking and going to the University of Michigan. Coming in with Adam Fantilli and that class of players. I mean, Rucker McGorty, his USNTP teammate, is supposed to be joining him there. That's going to be another loaded team over in Michigan, and that's with Beniers and Power and Johnson and Brisson all leaving. So he's going to have lots of talented teammates there and really a great opportunity to shine. But on the offensive end, he's got to find a way to involve his teammates a little bit more in the offensive zone, make the right reads, know when to attack, know when to pass. And I think that's just as important as the defensive attributes for him in order to succeed at the next level.
That's really interesting, too, because a lot of what you just said about Frank Nazar is about pretty much the opposite of what we hear as far as upside goes with somebody like Brad Lambert over in the Finnish league, is that he involves his teammates so much that with the team that he was playing on, granted being part of it, just couldn't finish it. So it's interesting to see that there's guys in this top 15 that could be in play for the Red Wings at 8 overall that have their strengths and weaknesses are just necessarily opposite, but it's all things that the Red Wings need. I guess with where I'm going with this, though, is there are a lot of options for the Detroit Red Wings at 8, and it is really, really hard to tell where these players are going to go. But do you realistically think that Frank Nazar will be in play at 8, or do you think that's just the guy you want to be there but don't necessarily think will be?
Realistically, I think he's in play at 8. In fact, I would be stunned if he went earlier than 8. In fact, I think 8 is probably the earliest he would go. My suspicion is he falls into the mid-teens. And I think people will look at his size, be a little skeptical of his ability to stick at center in the NHL level. They'll place the premium on the centers, and you'll see guys like Marco Kasper, Cutter Gauthier, Brad Lambert all leapfrog him. And he ends up going 14, 15, 16, 17, somewhere in there. So I firmly believe he's going to be in play at 8. It's just which team is willing to swing on the upside of his talent, his compete, and his skill set, and overlook the fact that he's 5'10.5" and may not stick at center at the next level.
Well, and that's really interesting, too, because we know that Steve Yzerman, as general manager, is not afraid of taking swings at guys who most other general managers in the league would not consider at that spot. Obviously, the famous one at this point is soon-to-be Calder winner, Moritz Seider, and we've said that time. And we do nothing but praise Moritz Seider on this podcast, because what else are we going to talk about as Red Wings fans right now, other than Moritz Seider being amazing? But it is just a really deep, but also kind of shallow draft class in a way. Like, there's a lot of really, really good talent after like 3, but none of them are clear cut above players. So it's going to be really hard to predict this draft class, what Steve Yzerman is going to do. I think we can say with pretty safe certainty he's going to go with a center, but that's also just us speculating, because they still do need a lot of help on defense, even though they are pretty loaded with prospects. But are there any other forwards that scream out to you at that 8 position that you would want Yzerman or be interested in Yzerman to take?
Yeah, so I've already mentioned Marco Kasper, Brad Lambert, Cutter Gauthier. Those are 3 guys that I think would certainly be interesting. Lambert obviously being the most interesting in the sense that he's got immense talent, probably the best skater in the draft, but jumped around to 3 different teams in the top league in Finland and never really produced at any point. So you definitely have a healthy dose of skepticism there, but he is the best skater in the draft, excellent skills. It's just, does he have the awareness to do that? Another guy that is dropping, although it's for a different reason, is Danila Yurov. He's a right winger over in Russia. Again, another immensely talented player, but questions about his ability to get a visa in the U.S., when he'd be able to come over. Has seen him slide a little bit more. He's probably going to be available in the mid-teens, but again, incredibly talented winger. And then the last one that I think is another good name to be aware of is Jonathan Lekkerimäki, also out of the SHL. Tremendously talented offensive playmaker. Didn't get as much of an opportunity to shine as Marco Kasper did this past year, and so you'll see a lot of people talk very highly of Marco Kasper's game, but playing in Rogla and that system under Cam Abbott on that kind of star-studded team was a much nicer environment for Marco Kasper than Jonathan Lekkerimäki, playing kind of on a bottom feeder team. Didn't really have as much of an opportunity to shine, but he is tremendously gifted offensively, a right winger there. So those are kind of the forwards that I think are very interesting, for Detroit at 8 to consider.
Do you think that they're in love with the idea of making it a forward?
I don't personally think so. My entire philosophy on this draft is this is the least information anybody's ever had at the time of the draft. You had a lot of tournaments canceled. You had some players lose their entire draft minus 1 year. Some players lost portions of their draft minus 2 year.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is probably the littlest amount of information NHL front offices have ever had to make these decisions. And that makes it likely that we're going to see chaos at the draft. And
but I invite chaos.
Right? I mean, bring on all the chaos. But truth be told, with Detroit, they need help everywhere.
Yeah.
You can't really say there's any spot that's set. Like, sure, maybe left D seems all right with Simon Edmondson, Albert Johansson, and you've got folks kind of coming in there. Maybe that's all right. Right D, you obviously have Moritz Seider there, but questions about if anybody else is going to be sticking there. Antti Tuomista was a guy you had hoped for, didn't really look great. So to me, I'm not ruling out anything. And there's a couple of great defensemen available in that range as well. It'll be interesting to see if anybody jumps on them. Pavel Minchikov from the OHL, and then there's 2 WHL defensemen, Denton Matichuk, Kevin Korchinski, both left shot defensemen. There are a couple of guys that very talented offensive guys. And then over in Sweden, you have Liam Bichelle, 6'5", 225-pound defenseman who can make plays and skate well for his size. So
sounds familiar.
There's a handful of guys out there that could threaten, and I wouldn't be shocked because, in my opinion, Detroit really needs help everywhere.
They really do.
Yeah,
you could make the argument that maybe goaltending, but it seems you always take a shot at a goalie later in the rounds anyways. I don't know. It's really tough to tell because, like you said, even with the defensemen in the cabinet we have, it's so hard to tell who's gonna pan out and who's not. As far as the pick itself, the 8th overall draft pick, and this is just me throwing a hypothetical out there. I don't think that it really is in play, but do you think there is a reality where Steve Yzerman's taking phone calls on the 8th overall pick to either move up or move down?
I think there's a couple of scenarios where that makes sense. I think scenario number 1 is Yzerman says, all right, I'm feeling a little bit of pressure here to start going for it. And similar to what Ottawa and New Jersey have said, in that they are willing to move that pick for a quote unquote impact player. There is a scenario where Yzerman says, all right, let's turn things up. Let me get an extension in place for Larkin, get an extension in place for Bertuzzi. Let me trade the 8th overall pick. Maybe that can help me land some impact player. There's a lot of big names out there floating around. Alex DeBrincat is rumored to be on the market.
Yeah.
Maybe that gets shopped in a scenario where Yzerman wants to be an aggressive player in the trade and free agency market. I don't think it's a realistic one, but it's certainly plausible. The other scenario where that gets shopped is if Yzerman is of the mindset that, hey, there's a lot of guys here in the same tier available at 8. If someone is in love with somebody at 8 that they want to trade up for and draft, I'm happy to slide back to 12, 14, 15, and get another player down there who I think, or who I consider to be of an equivalent talent level.
Tank Frank Nazar.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you think Frank Nazar is your guy, but other teams are passing on him, and there's somebody who's in love with Brad Lambert and wants to jump up and take him at 8, then yeah, you make that swap and you trade back. You maybe add a few more picks in the later rounds because, like I said, you're working off the least amount of information. You want the most starts available to throw at the board. And so if you consider a handful of guys to be in the same tier, maybe you do end up moving back a few spots to take somebody there. So I do think there are 2 scenarios where Yzerman plausibly could trade back, although I think realistically I don't see that happening.
And so, Scotty, do you have any other questions regarding the draft? Because I want to ask one just off-season general question.
No, my last question was about trading back, so you're chilling on my end.
Scotty and I have started to look at the free agent market this past week and a half, and we haven't gotten to forwards yet, but we've looked at goaltending and we've looked at defense, and not really in love with a lot of the free agents out there. do you think if there was a free agent that you wanted to bring in, if there is one, who would you want that the Red Wings to bring in? And how do you think Yzerman, if you were Yzerman, I know you got that little series going on. If I was Steve Yzerman, if you were Steve Yzerman, what kind of approach are you taking this free agent market?
Yeah, I mean that's the $1 million question, right? I think the most and my philosophy to this is what you can't do is get stuck in the range of being the 10th to 20th best team in the league.
Yes.
And I think a team that's been stuck in that range for a while is the Philadelphia Flyers. The Columbus Blue Jackets were flirting with that for a while. You're not really ever a threat in the playoffs, and you are not picking high enough to actually get you out of that mediocrity spot. And so for me, there's sort of two ways you go about doing this. You either go eggs all in the basket on trying to end up with a top pick in the 2023 draft. With the change to the lottery odds, this past year, there is an incentive to potentially tank because the odds have never been better.
Yeah.
Somebody at the worst overall team landing the first pick. Right?
And why did they change that?
Yeah, exactly. Right? When you have a handful of years and Detroit ends up being one of those teams screwed, it ends up changed, right? But so there's scenario one where you decide that, okay, I've got Tyler Bertuzzi available. Teams are interested. Let me go ahead and trade him. Jacob Vrana's got a couple years left. Very talented forward. If someone wants to take him, consider a trade. Filip Hronek's another guy who hasn't necessarily performed at the level you were hoping, but tends to hold some value around the league as a big right shot defenseman that puts up points. Potentially you're shopping him. You trade those three guys, you put your eggs in the basket of finishing with the worst record. And that's one way to go about it because the top of next year's draft is ridiculous. Obviously, Connor Bedard is the golden prize, but there's Michkov over in Russia, and he's unbelievable. Adam Fantilli, people are going to get to see at Michigan. He's unbelievable. I mean, those are just a couple of the top three guys there. And really the top 10 is loaded next year. And so that's not a bad way to go about doing things because immediately you've said, okay, what I'm going to do is my future is Lucas Raymond, Moritz Seider, and Simon Edmondson and Sebastian Cossa. And I'm going to add a top 3 pick next year to join that group. And now I've got a solid group that's going to age together and grow together. That's one way. The second way you go about it from a free agency standpoint is you say, look, I've got pieces I like in my system. I've got Lucas Raymond, who I believe is a bona fide first-line winger. I've got Moritz Seider, who I think is going to be a perennial Norris Trophy candidate. You've drafted your potential goalie of the future in Sebastian Cossa, and you've got Simon Edmondson coming over after he had a tremendous year. You've got a lot of pieces there. You say, all right, let me get Dylan Larkin extended. Let me get Tyler Bertuzzi extended for another 4 or 5 years. You've got Jacob Vrana under contract, and you go out and you make a big splash in free agency. The first, probably most important position for the Red Wings that has been the case for 3-4 years now is second line center. They experimented with Valtteri Filppula. That didn't work. They experimented with Pius Suter. That didn't work as well, although it was better than Filppula. But there's a handful of guys out there that could potentially do it. You could spend a lot of money on Nazem Kadri, who's been tremendous in Colorado. It's going to be expensive, but that's one way to go about it. Vincent Trocheck, he's been tremendous in Carolina. That's another way to go about it. Or you consider making a deal. If Dylan Strome ends up not qualified, if Ryan Strome ends up not signing in New York, if Andrew Kopp ends up not signing in New York, those are a couple of other options to consider there. And then after that, you consider adding on the defensive end, either through the trade market. Again, a couple of guys that are potentially available. Jacob Chikrin's been talked about for a while. Mm-hmm. Detroit has the pieces to make a deal there. And that's one way you scale up. And you aggressively go all in to try and do that. Realistically, I don't think Yzerman goes all in on either one of those strategies. I think guys you're going to end up seeing brought in are guys like Ian Cole on defense, a veteran, of multiple playoff runs, moves the puck well, very steady defensively. I think he's a guy you see brought in. There's potentially a lower end move made, like a Zach Aston Reese coming in out of Pittsburgh, good defensive center. I think those are the kinds of moves that you potentially see made as Yzerman maybe bides one more year of time before trying to scale things up.
For sure.
Yeah, and Scotty and I are kind of in the same mindset there too. I mean, with the draft being what it is next year, we've been talking about the 2023 draft for like it seems like 3 or 4 years now.
Yeah.
Everyone's
Since
known
these kids were like 15.
Yeah. Like everyone knows who Connor Bedard was for years. That it always seemed to make sense that it wasn't going to be until after that draft that things really started to get scaled back up. Now, did we get a little delusional in the first half of last season? Scotty and I certainly, at least I did. I won't speak for Scotty, but I did when they were beating teams and they were a 500 hockey team until February. But the wheels really fell off and cold water was poured on us, and we're back to reality as to where it is. So yeah, I think Scotty and I are in the same boat. It's going to be another year of kind of just piecing together a team, trying to take maybe a small step forward, like you said, biding your time and hoping that you get some lottery luck. Because I also just don't know if this team's gonna be bad enough to be in the, finish in the bottom 5. I just, with Simon Edvinsson potentially coming over next season, it feels like they'll be in the 8-10 range again.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to make this team bad, right?
Yeah.
That's why you'd have to ship out Tyler Bertuzzi, you'd have to ship out Philip Hronek, you'd have to ship out, potentially Jacob Vrana in order to do that.
And that kind of resets you a little bit too, which I don't know if
does.
you want to do.
Yeah, it changes your timeline. I think you're changing your time frame from saying, "Am I going to build around Dylan Larkin, Tyler Bertuzzi, and that's the core, or am I building around Lucas Raymond, Moritz Seider, Simon Edvinsson, and that's the core?" Because if that's the case, then you do need to trade. You do need to add more pieces to that core that are around the same age, so that team can grow together and win together.
Precisely. Great stuff, Prashanth. Thank you so much for coming on, man. We're running up against it here. Scotty, did you have any final questions?
No, sir.
Awesome. Prashanth, where can we find you? What are you working on right now, if anything?
Working on far too much, but you can always find me on Twitter at Iyer_Prashanth. If you ever have any questions or anything, you can always just hit me up in the DMs. That's where I told Brian that it goes down. That's where all the work happens. So, yeah, if you need anything, that's where to find me.
Yeah, I believe. What was it? I was DMing you about that one time when I was learning about expected goals above replacement a few months ago, and I was like, dude, look at Mark Stahl. I think that's what I was talking to you about.
Yeah, we were talking about Mark Stahl.
Yeah. Oh, I was in love with Mark Stahl. I still love Mark Stahl, although I know he's probably going to be gone. But we don't got to talk about that. We don't got time for that. Again, thanks for coming on, man. That was
appreciate it.
Great conversation, great prospect profile. Scotty and I will be back tomorrow with I won't spoil who it is yet, but plan to have another prospect profile on Wednesday. Same time, same place. It's your team every day.
Every day.